Running your own business is awesome. It's the dream, as they say. But it's very stressful as well. Customers, they'll see the front end, the products, the signs, the slogans, the happy owner. But it's the back end of the business that really drives the ship. The inventory management, the sales conversions, order processing and shipping. The business behind the business is the key to business. And for millions of businesses around the world, that business behind the business is Shopify. Nobody does selling better than Shopify. They're home of the #1 checkout on the planet, which is why so many businesses work with them. And Shopify brings the heat with their secret weapon, Shop Pay, which boosts sales conversions by up to 50%. And that means way fewer carts are being abandoned to checkout and way more sales are going. If you want to grow your business, you better be ready to sell anywhere and everywhere your customers are. Scrolling social media, on your website, in your store, and everywhere in between. It's no secret. Businesses that want to grow with Shopify. Upgrade your business and get the same checkout Heinz and Mattel use. Sign up for your $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/RTG, all lowercase. Go to shopify.com/RTG to upgrade your selling today. Shopify.com/RTG. What's up, everybody? Happy March. How's it going? I hope you're all enjoying this lousy March weather. It's actually like fucking 5 degrees here in Edmonton. Life is beautiful. It's summer. It's fucking summer here. Anyways, as has become tradition, no Remember the Game for the first week of the month. I need a little bit of time to chip away at ye old backlog. I actually finished Wild Arms this morning, the PS1 RPG. So that's going to be Remember the Game 326 next week. We're hoping to cover XCOM 2 before the end of March as well, but that's a big stake. I'm chewing over here, but we'll see if we get that done. And no worries, okay? The benefit of doing 5 podcasts a week is I've always got extra shows laying around. So to make sure you get your fix of my almost manly voice, here's an episode from our Expansion Pass archives free of charge. This is Expansion Pass number 189. It originally went live on December 7th of 2023, and it's all about the original PlayStation, the PS1, the OG. It was the first console I ever bought with my own money, so it holds a very special place in my heart, as I'm sure it does to a lot of you as well. And this episode is just a big shot of nostalgia. We're talking the system, the games, the controllers, the memories. We've done quite a few of these console retrospectives in the past. They always seem to go over well. So if you enjoy this, I'm asking you, consider giving our Patreon a shot. $3 is going to get you in the door and gets you instant access to over 250 Expansion Pass podcasts and over 220 Game Patch podcasts with new episodes every week. No ads either, so they're just Laffy Taffy. Plus, you can write into Remember the Game. You can DM with me. You can vote for games we cover. And most importantly, your $3 goes toward feeding my crippling Big Mac addiction. So, you know the whole rigmarole. Patreon.com/Remember the Game if you are interested. And whether you go there or not, I hope you enjoy this free episode of Expansion Pass. Thank you all so much for listening, and we'll talk some more retro games next week. Cheers. Not exactly like the biggest pump-up song of all time, but I'm hoping between that PS1 load-up chime and this, which I'm assuming most of you played, at least you're getting hyped up for the episode, getting a healthy shot of the nostalgia right in between the old legs there. What's up, everybody? Welcome to the 189th edition of Remember the Game Expansion Pass. It is one of our Patreon-exclusive weekly podcasts here at Remember the Game Industries. My name is Adam Blank, and if you're hearing this, watching this, or checking this out live on the old stream box, you support us on the old Patreon box, and if that is the case from the bottom of my old box, thank you so much for the support. We appreciate it more than you'll ever know. And this week, for Expansion Pass 189, we're kind of piggybacking on last week's episode. If you missed it, last week we talked about the games that changed gaming, and so many PS1 games popped up and made me realize that, like, the original PlayStation itself genuinely changed gaming as well. So we're actually going to dedicate this episode to talking about the original Sony PlayStation. I'll briefly get into the backstory of it in case it's villain origin story, if you will, in case you don't know what happened there. I think most of the episode is going to be dedicated to memories, the why we bought one, why it was a success, talking about some of the biggest games, and just stuff like that. A lot of you weighed in, as always. I'm going to sneak some of your comments in. I have to say, most weeks I enjoy reading the listener comments just because it's fun to share this hobby I like with so many other people. But this week in particular, I had a fucking blast reading the comments and just all these like great stories of people and like where they got their first PS1s and shit like that. It was just very nice. It was a little, I feel like we're getting into the Christmas season. Christmas is 3 weeks away. Lots of people talking about getting a PS1 for Christmas, and it's just a very happy, positive, hip, hip, hooray episode. I'm feeling good about this. So we're going to talk about the original PlayStation in just a second because, as you know, part of your Patreon perks is a peek past the podcast. So if you want to pop in your disc, make sure you have enough space on your memory card and crank up that Offspring CD. That'll make sense if it doesn't right now. I'll tell you what's been going on around here over the last 7 days or so. I don't have too much to tell you, as I'm sure most of you know. It's a lot of comedy right now. Comedy for the first time. I would say for the first time in quite a while. Stand-up is kind of almost taken a priority in my life over the podcast. Not that I'm not still doing these, but it's just, I went from doing 2 or 3 shows a month to doing 2 or 3 shows a week, and it's just a big shift in the old gears, as it were. So one thing that is a peek past the podcast that I do quickly want to touch on, I did post about it yesterday, but I'm moving the gameplay streams back over to Twitch. I have been trying to find a sweet spot for game streams for a long time now. At one point I was doing them all on Twitch, then I started doing some exclusively on Patreon, but that's through YouTube. And the problem with streaming on YouTube is y'all are so far behind me. I was streaming the Pokemon trading card game last week, and that was kind of the final straw because people were trying to weigh in on what they thought I should do and stuff like that. And you're like a minute and change behind me. So by the time you've told me, I've already moved on and I'm in the fight losing. And I just was like, hey, I don't mean to disrespect any Patreons, but like, does anyone have a beef with me moving these back over to Twitch? It does eliminate it as a Patreon perk because anybody can just watch it on Twitch. But I feel like I'm not really giving you value with these crappy YouTube streams. And most of the comments were like, no, it's cool. We don't really care. We just want to watch the stream. So we are going to move them back over there. So I'd really like to get more active over there. That's something I've been saying for a while, but I genuinely really, really want to. So Wednesdays and Thursdays from here on out, I'll be streaming at about 2:30 on Twitch most days, unless I've got an appointment or something. I'm going to try to start doing it on Monday afternoons, and I'm going to try to start sneaking in a couple more evening streams as well. It might not happen a lot until January because of comedy, but I'm really balls deep dedicated to trying to get a little bit more active over on the old Twitch box. So that's the plan right now. What else do I have to tell you guys? Oh, the Patreon poll for December. I posted about this as well. Usually I do them during the last week of the month, but I was sitting down looking at the calendar yesterday and realized if we run the Survivor poll in the last week of December, it literally has to start on Christmas Day to be done in time for the end of December. And I was like, I really don't feel like updating it on Christmas Day or Boxing Day, which I know some of you keep asking me, what the fuck is Boxing Day? It's December 26th here in Canada. And I don't know why you don't celebrate it. And yes, we all put on gloves and fight each other. And the last Canadian standing gets big deals on merchandise. It's kind of like our Black Friday, which we also celebrate now. So what the fuck? I don't know. Anyway, there's no reason to buy anything in Canada when it's not on sale because we just use everybody else's sales plus our own. Anyways, the point is we're going to run the Patreon poll for December from the 17th to the 23rd. It'll be wrapped up before Christmas. That way we're sneaking it in time. So get your recommended. We've already gotten you can get your suggestions in, but I'll be honest, like I have so many right now. Dude, this RPG poll is going to be vicious. There are going to be a lot of you fucking pissed off that your game did not make this poll. It is gonna get nasty. So I apologize in advance to everybody whose games don't make this poll because there's gonna be a lot of them. I'm not planning to take the last week of December off like I normally do because Shaylee and I are actually going to Vegas in January, the middle of January for a week. Well, for 4 days, basically the podcast week. So I'm not gonna take the week off between Christmas and New Year's, but I do already have the expansion pass for that week pre-recorded. So I'm going to warn you about that. Also, Mark and I are not releasing a Purple Monkey dishwasher on Christmas Day. That's a Monday. We're going to take that week off. We're trying to squeeze in all the episodes we can because Mark's taking some time off and going away for Christmas. And we were like, you know what? I'm sorry to any of you that wanted to listen to an episode of PMD on Christmas Day. We are going to skip that 1 week. So just so y'all know. And that's basically... I think that's about it. We have 3 Remember the Games left this year, and if all goes according to plan, it'll be Star Wars Shadows of the Empire next week, Psychonauts the week after that, and we'll wrap the year out with Portal 2. We have 3 more expansion passes this year, and if that all goes according to plan, I'll hit you with a Super Mario RPG remake review next week, an airing of Gaming Grievances to celebrate Festivus, and we'll wrap the year out with a Sega Genesis draft. I know y'all have been waiting for another draft. It is done. We've already recorded it. So, like, no question, that is dropping the last week of December. And then we'll push the Patreon poll or the Patreon choice topic of Expansion Pass to the first week of January. So that'll be your Christmas gift. It'll be a Genesis draft episode. And I think that's it. Molly, you have anything to say? No, that's it. Let's talk about the original PlayStation, right? That's why you kids are here. I'm going to queue up some iconic old school PlayStation music. Oh, yeah. And when it stops, we will talk all about the original Sony PlayStation. Enjoy the podcast, everybody. Let's go. I'd love to do some Adam Sucks at Video Games of Crash Bandicoot. I fucking love Crash Bandicoot. That's good stuff. Anyways, let's get into this thing. We're talking the original Sony PlayStation. Now, as you all know, I very rarely do, quote-unquote history lessons here at RTG because, quite frankly, I'm not that knowledgeable. I kind of just talk about my opinions. I get facts wrong and shit like that all the time. But I'm going to do it in, like, the quick, like, YouTube short version of where the Sony PlayStation came from for anyone that might not know. I'm assuming most of you know, but if by chance you did, it's a pretty interesting story. So gather around the lemon tree. Very quickly, originally what the PlayStation was going to be a CD add-on for the Super Nintendo. Sony had partnered with Nintendo to develop a CD add-on, and one of the names they had kicked around was a PlayStation. There was other names that they had toyed about. But then near the end of the PlayStation's development as an add-on to the Super Nintendo, Nintendo started to get a little bit nervous about Sony's growing foothold in this project and everything like that. And at the last minute, Nintendo pulled the plug and decided to go with Philips instead. Hence why you got those shitty Philips CDI Mario and Zelda games that nobody has played. Sony even went, I didn't even know this till I was getting ready for this episode. Sony went as far as to like come out on stage at like a electronics showcase or whatever the fuck and be like, we're working with Nintendo. We're developing this thing for Nintendo. And then Nintendo came out the next day and was like, nah, we're going with Philips. So it's a pretty big fuck you. They turned Sony over and just, had their way with them. It was pretty vicious. So Sony said, fuck this then. The PlayStation is already so far along. Let's just develop our own console. Apparently they talked to Sega for a little while about working with them and then decided like, fuck it, we'll just do this ourselves. We don't need any of them. Hence the PlayStation was born. I always use the analogy. It's like Spider-Man creating Venom. Nintendo created their own biggest competitor by accident by turning them down. And it's just such a interesting footnote. It's the Montreal Screwjob of video games for you wrestling fans. It's wild. Fill up my mouth with farts wrote in and said 2 things. 1, this was the very first console I bought with my own money at 16. I worked for my dad's company, saved up, and bought it from a friend who wanted to focus on the 64. I think I got a better deal there. I have been a PlayStation guy ever since. 2nd, I often think of what would have happened if Nintendo hadn't fucked Sony over in the development. Would we have gotten the more grown-up titles like Resident Evil or Metal Gear Solid or Grand Theft Auto on a system owned by a heavily family-based company? The PlayStation really brought gaming to the older teens and early 20s-some adults, and it's stayed with us ever since. Yeah, I agree with that second point. We'll get into the buying of the PlayStations. This is the first console I bought as well. I genuinely believe, and I'm very interested. If you think otherwise, let me know. Like, leave a comment or whatever. I'm interested. I'm very interested. Is this the biggest what if in gaming history? You could argue, what if Sega didn't drop the ball over and over and over again? What if the Dreamcast had a DVD player in it? What if Xbox hadn't existed? There's a lot of other questions. What if E.T. and the whole crash in the 70s, the early 80s, or whatever, hadn't happened? I know there are other what ifs in the world of gaming, but for my money, there's no bigger what if in gaming than what if Nintendo hadn't pulled the rug out from underneath Sony at the last minute. Because if Nintendo hadn't done that, Sony was ready to work with Nintendo. It sounds like the PlayStation would have been an add-on to the Super Nintendo. And it really does make you wonder, where would gaming be today? Let's just say Sony never went out on their own. The PlayStation never existed. It was just an add-on to Nintendo, and that's just how it was. First of all, I think Sega's still around. Because I think the reason the Dreamcast, as a console developer, not just as a third-party company, because the Dreamcast doesn't die if the options in that generation are the Nintendo GameCube, the Sega Dreamcast, and the Xbox. Like, if there's no PS2, Sega doesn't die. The industry can support 3 systems. And quite frankly, as much as I adore the Nintendo GameCube, I honestly wonder if the Dreamcast, I think the Dreamcast would have given the GameCube a run for its money. Had the PS2 not come along. The PS2 just dominated at a level that nobody's ever seen before. So the PS2 doesn't exist. So Sega probably still does exist. Does Xbox even get into the marketing or to the gaming world at that point? Like, because here, okay, like, and again, this is where this what if, I didn't even plan to go down this road, but like this conversation of whether or not gaming would look like it does today if Nintendo hadn't fucked Sony over is it's like a crack in your windshield that just spider webs, and the more you talk about it, it just grows and it grows and it grows. So let's just say Sega doesn't die because the PS2 doesn't exist. If the PS2 doesn't exist, does gaming, I would argue the PlayStation 2 is really what brought gaming mainstream. That's why it's the best-selling system of all time. You have to remember, I know by today, like in today's world, gaming is the end-all of all of media. It is the biggest of all the services, of all the platforms. But it wasn't like that back in the 90s. It wasn't like that prior to the PS2. But that DVD player, how cool the PS2 looked, all the GTAs and those types of things, everybody listening, I guarantee you every single person listening to my words right now understands how big the PlayStation 2 was for gaming. And the PS2 quite probably doesn't exist without the PS1. So then does the GameCube become the PS2? Does it have a DVD player in it because they're working with Sony? It's I don't know. Like, it's so many. And then does Xbox decide to get into gaming if the PS2 doesn't make gaming the giant economy or market that it is now? It's really something to think about, man. So I am hard pressed to think of a bigger what if in the history of video games than what if Nintendo hadn't turned on Sony at the last minute. It's a fucking massive, game-changing, no pun intended, I fucking hate puns, deal. So, this is an ad by BetterHelp. A band once said, "Work sucks, I know." And I think most people agree with them. Workplace stress is now one of the top causes of declining mental health, with 61% of the global workforce experiencing higher than normal levels of stress from their jobs. And while walking away from your job might not be an option, taking a little time every day to focus on yourself and your mental health can make a huge difference. I know in the summer I try to get outside every day, get a little bit of sun, and just enjoy the outdoors. It really helps. At least until my allergies attack, and then it's ugly. It's important to take steps to combat work stress, and therapy can be a huge one. It's not just for overcoming trauma. Therapy can help you define work goals, set some work boundaries, develop coping skills. It's like a cheat code for life. And if you're thinking, man, I'm too busy for therapy, well, look into BetterHelp. They make therapy as convenient as possible. You can meet with one of their over 30,000 therapists online and on your schedule, just like over 5 million people around the world already have done. As the largest online therapy provider in the world, BetterHelp can provide access to mental health professionals with a diverse variety of expertise. Unwind from work with BetterHelp. Our listeners get 10% off their first month at BetterHelp.com/rememberthegame. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/rememberthegame. We've had some great partners over the years here at Remember the Game, but I don't know if any of them have hit home for me quite like Hometown Hero does. No pun intended. Don't start. It's a transparent, honest cannabis company that helps people and gives back to those that have served their country at the same time. I mean, come on. As soon as I read about these guys, I knew I wanted to work with them. Hometown Hero is a cannabis company out of Austin, Texas, and they were founded back in 2015 by a U.S. veteran. They have two goals: create premium hemp products that can help everyone, and to support veterans by donating a portion of those profits to organizations set up to take care of those who have served. Hometown Hero products are of the highest quality, and everything they offer is made right there in the U.S. of A. Gummies, caramels, chocolates, drink mix, there's something for everyone. And what's more, their hemp is grown locally in Texas, which is something they should and do take a lot of pride in. And they offer certificates of analysis for everything they sell because they want to be clear that their products are as advertised, both in terms of potency and ingredients. No contaminants, you get what you pay for. Just how they conduct business is enough to get my good eyes' attention. But when you circle back to the fact that the company was founded by a veteran and they put such heavy emphasis on supporting veterans, this isn't just lip service. I'm not reading a script I was given here. I'm proud to have Hometown Hero associated with Remember the Game. Reclaim your evening. Visit hometownhero.com and use code RTG to take 20% off your first purchase. That's hometownhero.com, code RTG for 20% off your first purchase. The PlayStation ended up hitting shelves in North America in September of 1995. I will be honest with all of you, I was not interested in it until junior high. I got my first job and I bought my own. It was my first console that I bought with my own money. So when it came out in 1995, I would have been 11 years old, going on 12 years old. And I was fine with my Super Nintendo. I really didn't care that much. And then I remember getting our Nintendo 64 the year that it came out. And I didn't love it. I thought it was okay. I've talked about that before. I struggled very hard with the jump from 2D to 3D. I went in kicking and screaming. I would argue that to this day, I'm still like that. If you give me the choice between a 2D game or a 3D game, 4 out of 5 times, I'm still going to prefer 2D because I'm just an old soul and that's just the way I am. But I didn't particularly care about other systems until what it was one. You know what it was for me? It was when those Crash Bandicoot commercials started running, if you don't remember, Crash Bandicoot was like this giant. There was like a dude in like a giant Crash Bandicoot costume, and they filmed commercials where he was like standing outside of Nintendo headquarters with a bullhorn being like, "Hey, plumber boy, your worst nightmare is here." And that was really what made me start to think that PlayStation was cooler than Nintendo. And my first job I was 14 years old. I was bagging groceries at the IGA in Cold Lake, and I was making $5 an hour. $5. Fuck, I'm old. And I remember I saved up my money and I bought myself my first PS1. I bought the DualShock controller. I never used the controller without the dual analogs. I'd always had a DualShock controller. I don't ever remember using the one without until I got my PS Classic, which is still such an abomination of a mini console. And yeah, like so many of you, it was the very first system I bought with my own money, which I think is part of the reason that the original PlayStation will always have such a sweet spot in my heart. It was the first of two things. It was my first non-Nintendo console, and it was the first system I bought with my own money. And it really felt like it was my gaming puberty. I went from playing Mario and Mario Kart and stuff like that to playing Metal Gear Solid and Twisted Metal and obviously substantially more mature games. So I knew this was going to come up. So let's just address it right now. Makeshift Money wrote in and said it's no Sega Saturn. And you are correct. The original PlayStation is certainly no Sega Saturn. The PlayStation was successful. And Eric Steen said, so many great games. I remember playing Battle Arena Toshinden until my hands hurt. Same with Ridge Racer and Twisted Metal. The first Tomb Raider and Resident Evil were also excellent. Some great games that are less popular for it: Siphon Filter, Tenchu, and Bushido Blade. It was no Sega Saturn, but it was a great system, and I enjoyed having both. I knew the Sega Saturn comments were going to come up. This is not even a dig. This is the honest to God truth. Keep in mind, this was pre-internet. Like, there was a little bit of internet back then, but you weren't going online and like going to IGN and reading all the game news and stuff like that. I remember seeing ads in my gaming magazines for the Sega Saturn, and I swear I'm not joking. Like, it was like Gabbo to me. Like, I had no idea what the fuck. I was like, oh, look, Saturn is coming. Like, I had no idea what the fuck that thing was. And that was, for my money at least, as someone that never owned a Sega console, that was part of the problem with Sega. Was like, I remember the Genesis, and I was fascinated by the Genesis. I never never really wanted one, but I was interested in it. Then there was the 32X, the Sega CD, the Sega Saturn, and as like a not very in tune gamer that didn't know the Sega ecosystem, I genuinely had no fucking idea what the Sega Saturn was. And I'm not, again, like I know I poke fun at it a lot around here and stuff like that. I know some of you are ride or die Saturn fans, but like nobody can sit back and be like the Saturn was relevant compared to the 64 and the PS1. Like this was a 2-horse race. And it wasn't even really a 2-horse race. The PlayStation won. Nintendo got across the line in second, and I don't think the Saturn finished the race. It was like, don't look at us, run. No, don't come over here. Shout out to anyone who gets that reference. We'll wrap up the Saturn part of this right here. Juris Dr. Mario said, my brother and I were saving up for a soon-to-be-released PlayStation when we walked into an electronics boutique one evening, and we were shocked to see a Sega Saturn on the shelf. The sales clerk told us they'd received a few super-secret pre-release consoles. We could not resist the intoxicating allure of being the first kids in our neighborhood with the next-gen system, particularly when summer break was just a few weeks away, so we took our combined life savings and bought the Saturn. We soon learned that we had been duped. Sega had released the Saturn nationwide to disastrous results, and a few months later, the PlayStation hit the market and started dominating with exclusive titles like MK3 and Resident Evil. MK3 wasn't exclusive. Anyways, meanwhile, we were stuck with Virtua Fighter Remix, and Virtua Fighter 2. So we sold the Saturn in a newspaper classified ad to a mom who wanted to buy a video game system for her son, and we bought a PlayStation. I still feel bad for that poor kid. Yeah, that's it. That's all the time you fucking little virus Saturnians are getting. Your system is a boo. Anyway, like I said, for myself, this was the first console I bought with my own money. It was not only was it the first Nintendo system or non-Nintendo system I owned, it was genuinely like the first time I was really interested in owning a non-Nintendo console. I played the Sega Genesis whenever I go to the dentist. I'd play the Sega Genesis at my friend's house who had one, and I thought it was neat, but like, I don't know, maybe I was just, again, we didn't have the internet. You had what you had, and that was it. I thought that, like, I always kind of thought that the Genesis was, like, for houses that couldn't afford Nintendo. Like, I didn't understand even that they were, like, competitors. I was so ride or die Nintendo in my blood Nintendo that I thought, I was like, oh, I guess it's like, maybe it's for people that can't afford to buy a Nintendo. They get this thing. And I thought it was neat, but I never really jonesed or thirsted. I never lusted for a Sega console like that. But when the PlayStation really took off, and it took a few years before it really hit its stride, and it was doing those Crash Bandicoot commercials, and it was all over TV, and more people were starting to play it, it really got my attention. And I was, a young man. I was 14 years old. I had some money in the bank, and I was like, I'm going to buy this like cool, mature toy. I bought myself my first ever TV too, this little TV that went in my bedroom, and like all our Nintendo systems were always out in the living room for my brother and I to share. This one was mine, and he wasn't even allowed to touch my PlayStation. I never let him use my PlayStation. He could go fuck himself. This was mine. I used to try to explain to him, this is for adults. This isn't like the Nintendo with the cartridges that you could throw around and they won't break. You got to be careful with these discs. These were like some of the first, I never used a DVD. Now, there was my first CD player, was my PlayStation 1. So I started buying CDs. And I was like, you got to be careful with these because they scratch super easily and you can't do anything with them. And I wouldn't let anyone touch them. It was mine. And it was a big fucking deal to me. And it's so funny now that, like, I love my PS5. I love my Xbox. I like my Nintendo PC, But, like, this was the one. And again, this maybe goes back to that what if scenario. Like, would gaming have gone as mainstream as it was? I know Sega pushed Nintendo and gave them a bit of a kick in the bum with their cool campaign and stuff, but I would argue that Sony took what Sega did and did it better. I think Sega, and that's not a diss at Sega. I genuinely think Sega came up with the playbook for being the cool console. I just think that Sony took their playbook out of the dumpster and rewrote it better and did it better than I think anyone has. Up to that point, at least. So, Canadian Made Punk said, hey, Adam, I remember the era of the PS1 fondly. I grew up with Nintendo since the 80s, the NES, SNES, Game Boy. I did get a Genesis one Christmas, but then 95 rolled around. I was 11, and I got to see a PS1 at my buddy's house, and I was blown away. 96 came along, and I remember staring at the Sears catalog. excuse me, do I want a Nintendo 64 or do I want a PlayStation 1? It was one of the hardest decisions I was faced with back then. I made my choice of a PS1, and I'm glad I did. I've been down with PlayStation ever since. And here's the thing that I think people need to remember, right? It is undeniable. I was going to say indescribable, but it's I'm about to describe it. It's undeniable that Sony is on top of the gaming throne. Like, I know the Switch has outsold all their systems but the PS2, and the Switch is doing gangbusters right now. But, like, doesn't matter if you're ride or die Sony or if you hate Sony or whatever the fuck. It's undescribable. Like the PS1, 2, 3, and 4 are some of the best-selling consoles of all time. The PS2 is the best-selling console of all time. The PS5 will end its lifespan. It's probably a top 5 selling system of all time. Like, Sony has been on top ever since the PlayStation 1. And, like Canadian Made Punk said, I think there were a lot of people that grew up with Nintendo. All they knew was Nintendo. And then this new system came along and they were like, oh man, I'm interested. And I think they converted a lot of people to PlayStation fans, and a lot of them probably have never looked back. I promise you, there are hundreds of you, because we have about 2,000 patrons, so there can't be that many people listening to this. But I promise you, there are hundreds of you listening to this episode right now that got a PS1, went to the PS2, went to the PS3, went to the PS4, went to the PS5. It's like being in a family of Cubs fans, and it's just Grandpa was a Cubs fan, and my dad was a Cubs fan, now I'm a Cubs fan, and my kid's gonna be a Cubs fan. That was what PlayStation has been. And that was where it started. It was the PS1. It was the modern NES. It was so many people started with the NES and were Nintendo ride or dies for their lives. Sony, that was this console. It is that big a deal. Hot Cheese Sauce said, I remember getting a PlayStation for Christmas when I was 8. At first I was pissed because it wasn't a 64. I'd always had Nintendo and I wanted the newest system for Mario Kart, Smash, and Mario 64. But instead, my parents did the whole, this is a Nintendo, and got us the PlayStation. Sorry, I'm going to finish your comment, Hot Cheese Sauce, but I've always loved this is a Nintendo. For any video game, it's Nintendo. Is it still like that? I wonder. Because parents today know games because so many of us grew up with them. I would argue that PlayStation has become the generic gaming word for people that don't know gaming. Like, it used to be, oh, I'm playing Nintendo, no matter what. You could be at like an arcade cabinet playing Street Fighter, and it's like, oh, you're playing Nintendo. I would guess PlayStation is that word now. I don't think that word is as relevant now because people actually know video games. But I would argue PlayStation is Nintendo now. Anyway, Hot Cheese Sauce continues. The very first game I remember was Crash Bandicoot 2 and the Beast Wars game, and I soon fell in love with this console. There were so many great gaming franchises like the Digimon World, Spyro's, Twisted Metals, Final Fantasy, Crash, Bloody Roars, just to name a few series I played. I wasted many hours of my youth playing on this thing. No regrets. However, I found the console aged like moldy cheese, and playing on original hardware now is a chore. So we're going to get into how the PS1 has aged a little bit toward the end of this episode. It's funny because I've been going back and playing a lot of classic PS1 games for this podcast over the last 5 years, and many like the Resident Evils, the Spyros, honestly, some of the Crash Bandicoots, Medieval, Final Fantasy VIII, Final Fantasy Tactics. I have played a lot of PS1 games for the first time over the last 5 years or so, and it really is a case-by-case basis. I do agree that they haven't aged particularly well, as the 64 hasn't either. I'm a little bit shocked to hear these words coming out of my mouth. Well, I don't know if I should say. I was about to say, I actually think the 64 games have aged better, but I don't know if that's, I think it's case-by-case. Because, like, I played Spyro. I played Spyro 1 and Spyro 2, and they aged pretty well. They were pretty playable. They were great. Medieval was kind of rough. Tomb Raider was really fucking rough. The Final Fantasies, of course, they've aged well. And then when I play on my Nintendo 64, I'm like, I never really thought Mario 64 or Ocarina of Time controlled all that well to begin with. But I think Mario Kart and Diddy Kong Racing have aged perfectly. GoldenEye has aged like a fucking block of cheese. That game is disgusting now. So I think both systems have some that have aged well and some that haven't. By and large, yeah, it's a rough era. But it was the first 3D era, right? They were breaking down walls. I get it. Cobra said, this damn console caused me to make the worst gaming decision of my life. After playing Twisted Metal Resident Evil 2, I traded in my SNES and a ton of games to buy a PlayStation. Looking back, I wish I hadn't, and I just mowed some lawns instead. But the PlayStation was such a revolution in games, it made a lot of us do things we aren't proud of. I would love to know how many of you sold or traded in your Super Nintendos to buy a PlayStation? And if you did, do you regret it? Because I imagine that you do. You probably didn't back then, but while the PS1 hasn't aged all that well, Super Nintendo games have aged like wine, in my opinion. At least most of them have. We were never allowed to do that. I wanted to, but my mom and dad's argument was always, I can't remember so much with our NES, but our Super Nintendo and our Nintendo 64 were gifts for my brother and I combined. They were for the house, and we weren't allowed to trade them in or sell them. So I had to save up to get a PS1. Otherwise, I probably would have sold or traded in my Super Nintendo when it was time to get my hands on a PS1, and I would have gotten a lot of trouble for it. So, as I mentioned earlier, just getting back to my own history with this thing, the earliest memories I have of being interested in the original PlayStation was Crash Bandicoot. And they weren't the first games that came out. They weren't the first ones I played. Truth be told, I actually didn't buy or play Crash Bandicoot till I was in my 20s. When I started collecting video games, that was when I tracked down copies of the original Crash Bandicoots and played them. Until then, I hadn't. But they were the ones that got my attention because I thought they were funny. I love platformers. And the way that they were calling out Nintendo. I think that marketing campaign was so underrated because so many of you brought up, I was a Nintendo kid, and then this was the system that got my interest. And for them to directly, like, they didn't just say, like, hey, if you like Nintendo, consider us. They went right to Nintendo and were like, hey, plumber, you're old and shitty, and we're new and cool. It was just like Sega did, except I think PlayStation did it better. And I also think not so much, well, not necessarily, not just that PlayStation did it better. I think part of the problem was that a lot of people around my age at 40 years old, we were some of the first gamers. Like, we were the first generation of, like, hardcore gaming fans. And I know if any of you were like me, when the Sega Genesis came out, I didn't have enough money to buy a console of my own, and my parents sure as fuck weren't going to buy me two systems, so I had to play what I had, which was Nintendo. Sony was also doing the, like, hey, we're cool, they aren't, like Sega was. The difference is I was of the age now where I had money. If I had money when Sega was doing those Genesis does what Nintendo don't commercials, maybe I would have bought one. But I didn't have any money. When Sony started doing it, I had money. And I don't think that can be understated. That was a big deal. And those Crash Bandicoot commercials were a big fucking deal. They got attention. The thing was, by the time I finally saved up enough money and bought my own PlayStation, I almost felt like I was too old to play these little kid platformers, and I got into sports games and stuff like that instead, as we're going to get into in a minute. Slagathor II said, the first console I ever owned was the PlayStation. I opened it for Christmas one year along with Spyro and the first Crash Bandicoot. The first game I ever beat was Crash Bandicoot, and I remember calling my mom into the room as the credits were rolling to brag to her about it because it felt like I was on top of the world. And we're going to get to... Fuck, I wish I could find this comment. I shouldn't have put it in at the end. I should have put it in right now. Somebody wrote in about the diversity of the original PlayStation's lineup, and I'm trying to fucking... I gotta find it now because I should read it here instead of at the end of the episode. No, I can't find it. God damn it! I am gonna read it. I know it's in here, but I don't know where the fuck it is. So I'll read it when I find it. I don't know where the fuck it is. I suck at my job. Anyway, I think that's a great point, and I think that's something to be considered. Not only did they play to the older, more mature teenage crowd like myself with the Resident Evils, the Metal Gears, the Twisted Metals, the Final Fantasies, stuff like that, but they were playing to children that still wanted to play games too, with Spyro, with Crash Bandicoot, with those types of games. They were like, hey, if you have kids, if you are a kid and you want to play on the big kid system, we have these. Hey, you are a big kid and want to play on this? We've got mature titles that the other guys don't. It's really smart, actually. I agree. I guess that was just why I bought it. It just seemed so much cooler. You know, plus it was, like I said, my first CD player. And it's funny because when I bought my PlayStation, I saved up my money from my bag and groceries job, and I bought myself a PS1, and I didn't have enough money for a game or a memory card. All I had was it. So then I went and bought a magazine that came with one of those jam pack demo discs. And for 2 weeks until I got my next paycheck, I remember playing that demo disc. And I don't remember what all was on it, but I remember there was a level from Medieval. And I remember specifically the demo I played the most. There was one level from Tony Hawk Pro Skater. I don't remember if it was 1 or 2, but I think it was 2. I played the fuck out of that demo disc. And so many of you wrote in about just playing demo discs, which really warmed my heart. Mutiny Frame and Body said, man, watching my cousins grind on Final Fantasy VII over and over and then playing Pizza Hut demo discs when they were asleep was my only experience for several years before I finally got my own, and I wouldn't trade them for the world. Simpler times. Agreed. And less whining. That's a great name. Said, all my friends had the 64 and we got the PS for Christmas. I was mad at first because I wanted to play GoldenEye, but soon realized how much better off I was game-wise. Shout out to the demo disc that was included because we played the hell out of it until we could afford games. Who remembers Critical Depth? Basically, it was Twisted Metal, but with submarines. I can't say as I remember Critical Depth, but bet your ass I remember those demo discs. Man, that thing was a godsend. It was so funny because my brother is sitting out in our living room playing Mario 64 and Ocarina of Time and Mario Kart, and I'm in my room, not able to save. There's nothing to save. It's a demo disc, just playing the same demos over and over and over. And I just thought I was so fucking cool because I had the new adult disc system. Like, it just felt so powerful and revolutionary and sick. So massive shout out to demo discs. It's good times. I was trying to think, what game did I buy when I could afford to buy a game? And if I'm not mistaken, the first game I remember buying for my PS1 was WWF WrestleMania, the arcade game, because it was one of those greatest hits games with the green sleeve, and it was like $20. And I brought it home and played it for like a day and was like, well, this fucking sucks. And then I actually did go back to my Nintendo 64 and played like my WCW NWO Revenge and stuff until I could afford a better game. But I do remember buying WWF WrestleMania, and I'm almost positive that was my first game. And I remember like calling my parents into my room and calling my brother into my room and being like, look at how accurate, look at how real this game looks. And then it was like, oh, it turns out it's just not very fun. I'm sorry if you love that game. That game fucking sucks. That's the one where like the Undertaker would hit you with tombstones, like actual tombstones and the glowing hands. And that game was just fucking, it looked nice, but it was fucking hot trash. But I did used to play it. And I just love my PS1. I love that controller. To this day, I've said it countless times. I think that the PlayStation, like, cause dude, once they added the analogs, once you had the DualShock on the PS1, that thing didn't really change for the PS2. It didn't really change for the PS3. They just, it hit the gym for the PS4, and I'd argue they put it on steroids for the PS5. But if you put a PS5, I have a piece of artwork hanging in my office right now that most of you can't see. It's off the camera. But like, it's a PS5 controller underneath a PS1 controller, and it's wild how little that controller has changed outside of adding the analogs. You've got the 4 shoulder buttons on top, the 4 face buttons, the D-pad, and then obviously the two analogs that they added. And well, I personally do prefer an Xbox controller to PlayStation. I'm holding it up right now just because I like the offset analogs. As you all like, on an Xbox controller, the left analog is up where the D-pad would be, and then the right analog is down where the other analog is. I prefer just the way that those offset analogs feel to the PlayStation side by side. But remove those two analogs being side by side, I would argue that Sony's DualSense or DualShock, I always get them mixed up. The PS1 controller with the two analogs is possibly the best controller design of all time. It's just those two fucking blobs of controller out each side for you to hold on to, and it just felt so perfect in your hand. And it wasn't just that. I remember when I first started playing my PS1, it was the graphics. And I know by today's standards they look like shit, but they just seemed so much more mature than the Nintendo 64, didn't they? Especially sports games, which I really liked to play back then. They just seemed so much like, you take Wayne Gretzky's 3D hockey and you put it up against like NHL 99 on the PS1, and it's like, it's fucking two different worlds. It's like Wayne Gretzky's 3D hockey didn't even have 5 players on the ice for each team. It was 3v3. So that was, I remember that was one of the big things that really got me into my PS1 was the wrestling games. And obviously the quartet of the greats on the 64 are untouchable. But like, we used to play a ton of WWF Attitude. It was better on the PS1. We would play SmackDown, which was fucking sick. It just seemed so much more mature. It really did. It really felt like you were going from this toy to like, I'm an adult now. I get the grown-up system, you know? Rowdy Roddy Ryan said, OG PlayStation makes me immediately think of the opening chime when turned on. Only the Mega Drive Sega theme of Sega or EA Sports. It's in the game. Match for awesomeness. Agreed. Dude, there's a reason I say it every week. Every fucking week when I host Game Patch. And I'm like, I'm going to queue up that PS1 load up chime that I love so much. Oh. God, that's good, buddy. That is just heroin right into your ears. I agree. It's one of the most iconic load ups of all time. I love it. Let's talk the games. I know. The games are what matter, right? Let's talk about some games. Blaine the Hoagie Man said, the original PlayStation may not have been my first real taste of a non-Nintendo system, but it was the first one I owned. From being able to play the first 3 Crash Bandicoots, to the 3 Final Fantasies, and 9 becoming my favorite game of all time, to some underappreciated games like Underworlds and Road Rash 3D, while some of these are Oddworlds, and Road Rash 3D. While some of the system's games may not be much to look at anymore, one thing I will say, I feel the system has a very ambitious library of game that, oh, there it is. That's Hoagie Man said it. Hoagie Man says, one thing I will say is I feel this system has a very ambitious library of games that sadly I don't feel reflects libraries of today's systems where they like to play it safely. Agreed. And I think that's one of the things that Sony did so well. Nintendo, to this day, everybody knows that like Nintendo, you bought it for Mario and Zelda, right? Like that was what you were playing Nintendo for. And then like PlayStation really fucking got out of their like Crash Bandicoot, Spyro, Metal Gear Solid, the more adult Final Fantasies, Resident Evil, Twisted Metal, Medieval, like the list goes on and on and on. They tried everything. They realized like we need to get everybody. And I wish I could have put your comment in earlier, Hoagie Man. Well done. I agree. The PS1 had such an ambitious library of games. I already mentioned a couple that I played. The NHL games. And I remember they had multiple. They had like NHL Breakaway. They just had like I have like a hair in my eye. It's driving me crazy. There we go. They have the classic EA NHL games. I think it was like NHL Face Off or something. They had so many hockey games. And I loved them. I used to buy, I would have seasons going on like 2 or 3 different hockey games on my PlayStation on any given moment, just depending on which one I felt like playing. The wrestling games, like I said, I think the Nintendo 64 games are better, but in particular, the SmackDown games. I remember playing WWF SmackDown on my PS1, and the music was like quote unquote CD quality compared to those digitized versions on the Nintendo 64. And the wrestlers would come out, I can't remember if it was SmackDown 1 or SmackDown 2, but they would come out for their entrance, and their actual entrance video would be like playing on the background behind them. Again, as opposed to these like, they look like the 64 games, it looked like they found little versions of the images on Google and like blew them up so they were all pixelated and shitty, and it just felt so much more mature. It was wild. Dude, WWF Attitude. I never played WWF Attitude on the 64. We would play it on the PS1, and we would fucking play it for hours and hours and hours. I loved sports games on my PS1. I've answered this question before because people ask me, how in the fuck are you a Tampa Bay Rays fan? I don't remember what game it was, but I bought a baseball game for my PS1, and I was not a baseball fan at the time. I was just jonesing for a new sports game, and I had played like Ken Griffey Jr.'s Major League Baseball on my Super Nintendo. So I bought a baseball game for my PS1, and I brought it home, and it kind of taught me the rules to baseball, but I had to pick a team to play as, and the Tampa Bay Devil Rays had just come into the majors, and they had that ugly neon green and purple logo, and they were like the lowest rated team in the game, and I was like, I'm going to go with the underdogs. I'm going to pick the shitty team and then hope that they eventually get good. And that is the origin story of why I'm a Tampa Bay Rays fan. And I used to play that game all the time. And my dad hates baseball. And so he would like come into my room and see me playing this baseball game. And I could tell that he was just like, the fuck are you doing? Because he wanted me playing hockey. And I was playing this baseball game. Like I loved sports games on that thing. My God. And then of course, the RPGs. Everybody fucking talks about the RPG lineup on the PS1. And I think the number one RPG everybody knows is probably the one about the guy with the spiky blonde hair, the giant sword, who lives in the rundown city, with the girl who sells flowers that fucking sucks, the big angry guy with the gun on his arm. And I think it was called Spiky Hair and Gun Arms Mystical Adventure, I think. Strife 89. wrote in and said, when someone told me they had a PlayStation growing up, I pictured a small child's portable plastic playground thing. Boy, was I wrong, and my life changed forever. A PlayStation game was wrapped under the Christmas tree one year, but we had no PlayStation. Come to find out, it was already hooked up and ready to go in the next room. First game I bought at Toys R Us with Christmas gift cards was Final Fantasy VII. Life was good growing up in the 90s. We literally just talked about this last week on the games that changed gaming. Final Fantasy VII changed gaming because Final Fantasy VII, whether you want to argue it's overrated or not, it was like the first cool Final Fantasy. Final Fantasy 2 and 3 on the Super Nintendo were neat, but they were nerdy titles. But I remember Final Fantasy VII being in like every magazine I had. One of the earliest things I remember doing on the internet was trying to look up how to revive a certain somebody, which is funny because I don't even fucking like that person. But trying to look up how to revive her in that game and then finding all these made up rumors and then going home and trying them and having them not work. I remember buying Final Fantasy. It's a true story. When we grew up, I lived in Cold Lake growing up, 3 hours north of Edmonton. And we used to come down to Edmonton about once a year to go on like a shopping trip. And because we didn't have as many stores in Cold Lake. And we'd go to West Edmonton Mall. And there used to be this shitty game store in West Edmonton Mall by the hockey rink that their games were so much more expensive than they had to be. But I remember buying Final Fantasy VII there just because I wanted to buy something at the mall. And I remember taking that game home, and I remember that thick disc case and opening it up and seeing that it was 3 discs. And he was like, I've never played a game that's more than 1 cartridge, and now I have this 3-disc RPG, and just reading that manual front to back and that game, I would argue Final Fantasy VII was the PS1 Super Mario Brothers. I know it didn't come out till years after the PS1 came out, but fuck me, Final Fantasy VII was a big deal. All wrapped up in a soft, warm flour tortilla. Oh, that sounds nice. Wrote in and said, got it for Christmas one year with Twisted Metal and the Americana album. I played both on repeat for days. The countless demo discs that made me able to kick ass on that specific level until I rented the real game and got my ass kicked at the rest of it. It's funny you brought up Americana because I've said this before. That's why I said put your PlayStation or your Offspring CD in. I probably went through about a 3-week, maybe month-long span in my life where when I was not at school, I was at home in my room grinding Final Fantasy VII and listening to Offspring's Americana. To this day, when I hear the songs from that album, like The Kids Aren't All Right, which is the best song on that album, it's probably my favorite Offspring song, actually. I think of Final Fantasy VII. I think of just walking around trying to grind my materia and leveling it up. I just did it over and over and over and over and over, and it's just good memories, man. I may not be the world's biggest Final Fantasy VII fan. I don't hate it. I'm middle of the road on it, but like the nostalgia I have for it is through my ass. It's fucking insane. And so many of you wrote in about RPGs. Xenosides. I don't know how to say your name. Xenocide, but then it's Z-R-O. Xenocide Zero? Oh, Xenocide Zero? Xenocide Zero, that makes sense. Wrote in and said, I will always have fond memories of the original PlayStation. We had a Nintendo growing up, and since siblings fight all the time, my mom threatened to give it away to our family friend if we didn't stop. Well, we didn't, and she lived up to her word. Later, my brother brought back a Sega Genesis. I was mad it wasn't a Super Nintendo, and it was a great system to have. But once the PlayStation was announced, I was on the fence to ask for that or a 64. The Christmas the PS1 was out, we got a bundle pack with 2 controllers, a memory card, Crash Bandicoot, and Parappa the Rappa. That PS1 got me introduced to RPGs such as Breath of Fire 3 and Final Fantasy VII, and so many other great games, which led me to be a Sony fan for life. I would be willing to bet at least some of our... I mean, you're not young by today's standards. You're old too. But compared to me, you're young. Some of our quote-unquote younger listeners that are diehard RPG fans got started with Final Fantasy VII. That game kicked off a lot of addictions. 100%. Jigsaw said, my dad bought and my older brother a PlayStation for his birthday in 98. We had the demo disc, played it over and over. That was my intro to Parappa the Rappa. But the first game we got was Mega Man X4, and it's still one of my favorites to this day. And this PS1 is one of my favorite consoles due to the sheer amount of hours we poured into it. I can't leave without mentioning Final Fantasy IX, my favorite entry in the series. Yeah, I know some people dunk on Final Fantasy VIII, which you're wrong, by the way, but Final Fantasy VII and IX are just... like, they're so synonymous with this console. Joseph Rosselli said, for me, the biggest holy shit moment was getting Final Fantasy IX and seeing it was 4 discs. 7 and 8 might have been, but 9 was the first console Final Fantasy I owned. After primarily playing Crash and Spyro when I first got the PlayStation and loving them, seeing something that required multiple discs made me realize how much bigger games were going to get moving forward. I remember reading in a magazine once that if Final Fantasy VII had dropped on the 64, it would have been like 20 cartridges or something. That was one of the reasons they brought the Final Fantasy VII over to the PS1, was because the discs had so much more space on them. And I remember thinking that too with the 3-disc Final Fantasy VII. I was like, this game is going to take 3,000 hours. And remember, it wasn't like it is today where every game takes 3,000 hours. That was a big deal back then. One big PlayStation franchise I missed out on growing up was Resident Evil. I remember seeing them and I thought they were too scary because I am a chicken shit and I don't like scary things. And it's funny that now I've become like a huge Resident Evil fan. I've played most of the mainline games. I love them. And I think I would have liked Resident Evil if I'd played it back when it came out, but it just seemed too scary. I stuck to sports. Captain Alcatraz said, I'll never forget seeing Resident Evil on my uncle's PlayStation for the first time. It looked like playing a film at the time, and the idea that games could be scary after playing nothing but Sonic really showed me a whole new side of gaming. Now, I just want to point out too, notice how many people are writing in with comments about seeing like their older siblings or their uncles or their parents playing these games. I think the PS1 was one of the first systems that really adults got into because it was more mature. It wasn't Mario with Princess and Link anymore. It was I think that's not to be understated how big a deal it was that it was a mature console. Professor VJ Cornucopia's Food Megorium and Great American Steakery, fucking love that handle, said one of the funniest memories I have of the original PlayStation is staying up all night to play the original Resident Evil. My friend and I had no idea what a memory card was at the time and how important they were. We spent hours playing Resident Evil lights off, terrified to open every new door. Little did we know the true terror was awaiting us. We went to save our game to pick it up the next day, and we had no memory card. So then we decided to just stay up and try to beat it, also not realizing how long that would eventually take. We finally threw in the towel when the sun began to rise. I remember, that was the one thing about the PS1 that threw me off, was that I needed a memory card. Because there were like some Nintendo 64 games that needed it, but by and large, we were used to saving on cartridges. Those memory cards were a bit fucky. Tony Hawk Pro Skater 2. That is the game that I have put the most time into on my PS1. I'm quite confident. My friends and I played that. We went, like, we would either be Mario Kart 64, wrestling, GoldenEye, or Tony Hawk Pro Skater 2. And that Tony Hawk could stand toe-to-toe with these great Nintendo 64 games that had 4 controllers. Instead of playing games with 4 players, we would take turns playing Tony Hawk Pro Skater. My God, Tony Hawk Pro Skater 2 was fucking insanity. I just had to throw that in there. That's probably my most played PS1 game. I love Tony Hawk Pro Skater 2. KB Toys said, I experienced my first real racing game through Gran Turismo at my cousins, and it turned me into a car enthusiast and put me in the career I am in today. That's very fucking cool. Ironically, and I'm not dunking on it, but ironically, Gran Turismo is the reason I don't like racing games today. Because I remember getting it and playing it, and I couldn't get my driver's license in it, and I just got pissed off and quit. I was like, I'm going back to Mario Kart. But I could see how that game would turn on like a whole generation of racing fans. Speaking of racing games, Inside Wedge said, I got my PlayStation for Christmas. I only got the PlayStation itself, no memory card. So I rented a game, and I rented Driver, and I couldn't get past the tutorial. I took it to my friend's house, and my buddy got through it amazingly. Now I can actually play through the game. 20 minutes later, I had to go home, and with no memory card, that was it. I never got past that tutorial on my own. I just want to say for the record, all of you writing in about this tutorial level in Driver, you have legitimately killed any chance that game had of getting an episode of RTG. I don't even know if the game is good, but the sheer number of people that have written in and said I couldn't pass the tutorial level makes me like, I'm never playing that fucking game because I'll never beat that. Of course, Metal Gear Solid. Quite frankly, outside of Final Fantasy VII, it's probably the number one game I think of when I think of the original PlayStation. And I remember playing that with my friends. I bought it. And I could never get too far in it, but I remember playing it with my friend at my friend Miles' house, and we would all take turns on it and just thinking like, this is the most realistic fucking insane video game. And it might have been at that point that I'd ever played, right down to the little details, like the ways like when he'd run, hiding under things and hiding from enemies, using his smoke to find the laser grids. And I was like, I remember playing that and thinking that was the game that made me really realize how much more mature the PS1 was to the Nintendo 64. I was like, this is not Mario 64. This is fucking insane. And even if I have gone, the reason, I mean, I've talked about this before, but truth be told, like, The reason I went to the Xbox and GameCube over the PS2 was Metal Gear Solid 2 because I hated it that much. And then the reason I didn't pick up a PS3 until right at the tail end of that generation was because I was still mad about Metal Gear Solid 2 and I'd walked away from the PS2. And then I got out of gaming altogether. But Metal Gear Solid 2 is maybe the most negative impact any game has ever had on my life. I'm sorry if you love it. I know a lot of you do. I fucking hate that game. But there was a time before I became that villain to the Metal Gear Solid community. I was one of you. I liked the original Metal Gear Solid. I thought it was just, I couldn't believe it. I'd never seen anything like that game. That's a special video game. Ocelot of Woe wrote in and said, "Hi, everybody. Sorry, I love me some Dr. Nick." Fuck. Anyways, the PlayStation. The first time I played it was at a friend's house and the game was Gran Turismo. I thought it sucked because I spent my time doing donuts on the track. Eventually, I rented the system from Blockbuster with some interesting looking game called Metal Gear Solid. I remember hating Metal Gear on the NES because I sucked at it, but I wanted to see if they'd improved on it. Since that day, I never looked back. Yeah. I think that Metal Gear Solid, Greg Miller from Kinda Funny talks about how Metal Gear Solid was the reason he got into the line of work that he's in. Sorry, I had to hydrate my old vocal cords here. And even if you don't work in games, like I'm sure Metal Gear Solid had a indescribable impact on so many people's gaming lives, careers, whatever the fuck you want to call it. Like that game is just, it's a special video game. Kugda said, every time I hear the original PlayStation boot up chime, I think of Twisted Metal 2. It was the first game I got for my PlayStation, and me and my brother would play it for hours. Yo, I didn't play Twisted Metal 1 or 2. I remember getting 3 and 4. And they had Rob Zombie in them, I think. At least one of them did. Fuck me. We played a lot of Twisted Metal. Oh my God. I have so many great, we would like work together going through the story mode or whatever the fuck, trying to help each other and figuring out where all the secrets were and knowing all the codes for shooting like freezing missiles and stuff. And just, oh my God, we played so much Twisted Metal. Fuck. And like, I like Rob Zombie to this day. One of the rare non-pop bands I like because of Twisted Metal. I don't know if Rob Zombie is a band, but whatever the fuck. Because of Twisted Metal. Yeah, Twisted Metal was awesome. Pep said the biggest impact from my group was Tekken 3. This was late 90s and the arcades were still going strong with fighting game tournaments. Tekken 3 was the first game that somehow kept the arcade magic on the console. We ended up piling into someone's house and drawing up huge brackets for a tournament. It still felt and played like we were at the arcade. I don't know if we realized it at the time that it was going to be the death of the arcade atmosphere. I'm interested. I wonder if that did kill off the big arcade tournaments. I wonder. I would believe that. That would make sense. I know I'm not a fighting game guy, but that would make sense. That's fascinating. That would be a good time. Even though we used to do it with Smash. We would play Smash Melee for days and make tournaments. I had that tournament mode in it, and we would play that, and we just sucked, but it was fun. Dan Cruz said the PS1 was before my time, but I do have a story about it. My family told me when I was a baby, maybe a couple years old, I took a hammer and broke my brother's PS1. I was too young to remember, but once I grew up, I was really upset about it because I wanted to play some of those games like Spyro and Crash. Dan, if that's true, you're lucky your family didn't disown you, because my family would have. I would have insured it. If my brother had smashed my PS1, I would be an only child right now, probably in prison. So, anyways. This episode has gone long. Let's wrap this thing up with just some closing thoughts. I want to just read a few more of your we have just so many comments again, guys. I read as many as I could. I'm going to read a few of your final comments, and then I'm going to wrap up my closing thoughts on the PS1. Normal Normie said, the PlayStation, the babyface console that came seemingly out of nowhere, told Sega to hold its beer, and then proceeded to drop the people's elbow on Nintendo. It ushered in so many innovations, from CD format that combined low-cost production with high-capacity storage, memory cards which kept your save files safe from accidental or malicious deletion, that was me, to the first dual analog stick controller complete with haptic feedback. Sure, the blocky polygons from early 3D games are an eyesore by today's standards, and the ability to include voice acting doesn't produce many award-winning performances, but had that bland gray box that somewhat resembled a toilet not blazed the trail forward in gaming where angels feared to fly, our hobby would not be where it is today. Fucking well said, Normal. Exceptional Normie this week. As well said. I agree with all of that. And I will say, yes, it did bother me just a little bit that I couldn't erase people's saves. Fuck. Sorry about that. I just dropped my phone. It did bother me just a little bit that I couldn't erase people's save files like I prefer to do when I would rent a cartridge-based game because you're all safe on your precious little memory cards. And if I'd had it my way, I'd have broken into your house and stolen your memory cards and deleted shit off them. Doug Walsh said, much like the 360 was for you, the PS1 got me back into gaming. I was obsessed with gaming through the Atari 2600 and NES generations, and then sports, girls, and college distracted me. The PlayStation was the first big purchase I made as a married adult. I was 22, and not only did that love never die, but 26 years later, I rarely go a day without gaming. Though I've been playing exclusively on Xbox since the 360, the boot up chime you play for Game Patch floods me with nostalgia every week. Keep it coming. Yeah, that's funny too. I never thought about that, but there are probably people that the PS1 is, your 360. It's the game that brought you back. I always think for a lot of people, the PS1 is the system that got you into gaming. But yeah, I bet you there are people that this was the one that brought you back to gaming. That's fascinating. Lord Finish said, awesome console and great memories from high school playing it with my friends. It's too bad most PS1 games have aged like milk. It was a first of its kind, a true 3D console, and it shows. But the PS1 walked so the PS2 could run. Nothing but love for this tiny system that revolutionized the whole gaming world. I agree. It did indeed walk so that the PS2 could run. I agree with that. And Jailer has the last word this week and says, this was the system that made me realize there was a world outside of Nintendo. I remember visiting a friend and seeing Ape Escape and having my mind blown. I have much love for this era of gaming, and I wish we got more indies in this style, like how we're getting all these 16-bit indies now. That one's interesting. Would you want that? Listeners, like, I love when we get a Shovel Knight or a Celeste, a classic pixel art NES, SNES, Sega Genesis inspired indie game today. Would you want games like Resident Evil 1, like Metal Gear Solid, like Crash Bandicoot? Like I want to say no, but I've genuinely had a lot of fun going back and playing some of them. So maybe I would. Maybe there's something to be said for that era. And those classic block graphics and shit. I wonder would today's people, because the thing about it is like pixel art is like Shovel Knight's gorgeous. Like, Celeste is fucking beautiful. Like, those are great looking games. If you released a game that looked like the original Resident Evil or Metal Gear Solid today, would people be like, oh man, that's nostalgic as fuck? Or would people be like, that's ugly? And I don't know. I don't know. I would be interested. I agree with you, Jailer. I'd be fascinated. If a game came out like that today, I'd be fascinated. I guess my own closing thoughts. My throat is getting really dried out. This was one of those episodes where, like, I just pulled my pants down and just let my fucking admiration for retro gaming just run rampant. Like, I hope my passion for this episode came through. I'm definitely feeling it in the old pipes here. I guess my closing thought on the PS1 is I would make a genuine argument that it's the second most important video game console of all time, at least from the NES on. I know some would argue the ColecoVision, the Ataris, and those paved the way for Nintendo. I know my gaming knowledge and history goes back to the NES, and I still think the NES is the most important video game console ever made. And I think a lot of people would agree with me on that. I would argue the PS1 is number 2. I know Sega pushed Nintendo, and I know the PS2 is like the greatest seller of all time, and I know the Super Nintendo is great, but like the PS1 is Sony's NES, and Sony has been king of the gaming mountain for almost 30 years. And the PS2, I think, is the system that made gaming normal and mainstream. And all that comes from the original PlayStation, which all, again, goes back to that what if we started this episode off, that rock chip in the windshield of Nintendo saying, fuck you to Sony, and Sony being like, no. Who can go fuck whose self? And then that crack just spreading. So I genuinely think the PS1 is the second most important console ever made. And I love it. I love that thing. I have no interest in owning one today. I have a backwards compatible PS2. That's good enough for me. The PS1, like someone mentioned earlier, it's kind of a bitch to use today. But I have a lot of love in my tummy for the original PlayStation. This was fun. I hope you all enjoyed this episode. I had a good time this week. That was a good time. God, I love talking video games. I'm going to sign off here. I am going to take my dog for a walk. I'm going to get this edited, and then I'm going to edit this, or I guess, I don't know. I'm going to go do some comedy tonight. That's what I'm going to do. But thank you so much for listening. Quick reminder, I should have mentioned it off the top. Game Patch this week. We're going to record it Friday at noon instead of Thursday, so I can get in anything that breaks at the Game Awards. It'll go live Friday afternoon, so it's going to be a little bit late, but you'll still have it in time for the weekend, okay? Thanks so much for the support, everybody. Thank you to everyone that wrote in. As always, I appreciate all of you, and I will talk to you on the next one. Cheers, so long. One more time. Goodbye. Thanks again for listening. Head over to patreon.com/rememberthegame to see what all's waiting for you in our bonus our bonus podcast archives. There's a whole bunch of these console retrospectives over there, tons of modern game reviews, lots of ranking episodes, some comedy episodes, hypothetical episodes. All 5 Blankies episodes are all over there. That's all included for just $3 a month, as is Game Patch, our weekly gaming news show. And then if you want to bump it up to $5 a month, you also get my bi-weekly vlogging show, The Rambling Idiot, and Mark McHugh and I's Simpsons show, Purple Monkey Dishwasher, every single Monday. Plus, you can write into the show and vote on the games we cover, and you know how it goes by now. Patreon.com/rememberthegame. And I don't know, leave us a good review. Find me on social media at Member the Game if you want to follow us. Oh, check out our subreddit, Remember the Game, over on Reddit. We're coming up on 1,000 members, which is my goal, so please come over there and check that out. And I think I'm good. Yeah, I don't feel like plugging anything else. That'll do it. Thanks so much for listening, everybody, and we'll be back next week with Remember the Game 326, Wild Arms for the PlayStation 1. Take it easy, everybody. Cheers.